continues in a very dedicated way after 1947. Firstly, through the denial of democracy, and that is continuing with even if it's nominal adult franchise, that denial of democracy. And why did that happen? What is the contrast with India, where the Indian National Congress not only was institutionalizing democracy, but it was doing that on the basis of a very, very effective program of land reform. It was promising land distribution, but again, not to the poor people, but to the village elites, the peasant elites. But at least what they did in the process was knock out the landlords, who would have been a major obstacle to industrialization. What we have is that the landlords come in and carry on through, and they in fact use the Muslim League, etc., if you look at the micro politics of partition, as the vehicle for continuity. The military continues because it gets massive amounts of land in the canal colonies, canal irrigated land. The bureaucracy becomes overpowerful because it controls the source of water, which is very powerful, and because it controls the mutation, transfer of millions and millions of plots of land. So it is a hydraulic society that is authoritarian, that is not geared, not positioned for poverty relief. And what we can see in the next 60 years, almost decade by decade, as the regimes change, it's almost mechanical how it happens every decade. It's almost like the military and the civilian elites are building up their hunger. Those guys have had put in a stake in the pie, and then it's the next 10 years, it's the other part of the elite. So in this, I think the 70s was a time when there is some degree of less inequality. And one of the anomalies of Pakistan is that, according to the theory, if you have economic growth, that should lead to less inequality. Inequality levels should go down. But what we've seen with high growth periods is that the Gini coefficient goes up. And that is because the political economy and the resource capture is geared for the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer, even during periods of more rapid growth. Now, unfortunately, what happens in the 70s, although there's some degree of, the 60s is a prime example of that. But what was happening there, at least, was that the business community was delivering, industrialization was happening, the trader class was transiting, especially in this city, in a very, very spectacular way, into an industrial class. But the old was still there. The old that had continued after 1947, and that struck back, retaliated, and decimated the prospects for rapid industrialization through the nationalization strategies of the 1970s. So, unfortunately, although there's less poverty inequality or less economic inequality, and even some reduction in poverty, the strategic alliances that brought about the nationalization strategies of the 70s were unfortunately anti-progressive and anti-industrialization and anti-modernization, in fact. And then we get on to a situation, for instance, the next spurt, if we look at even the last 10 years, that we've had a growth spurt, and that has actually increased the levels of inequality, and it has also increased the levels of poverty. Because the rapid reduction in interest rates, very, very kind of irresponsible policies by a prime minister who was, I think, a PR official in an international bank and finance advisor, very close friend of mine, but was just a teacher of company finance. And when guys like that get into your economic macro management, they will see only as far as their horizon goes. And this rapid reduction in interest rates, resilient and ongoing inflation, which we're still suffering from, which has created more inequality as well. So let me just end by just giving you 2 or 3 figures, so I've gone on a bit. That 35 million in 1947 has now got onto 180 million. If you want to relieve poverty, please have a prioritization on massive economic population planning strategies, whatever the religion. But without that, this is going to is going towards what is happening: civil conflict. Now, of that 180 million people, we have a massive youth bulge. That is, massive amount of concentration in the lower age groups. 50% of the people are 20 or less. 80% of Pakistanis are 30 or less. What are the capabilities of our public management system which is riven apart by corruption and by rent seeking anyway, and highly ineffective in the implementation of redistributive policies, to cope with this almost like population time bomb that we're facing. And now we are looking at population, or sorry, at poverty levels exceeding 40%, which the rapid inflationary problems and the fact that 90% of our economy anyway is in the informal sector. Nobody has ever done anything for our poor people. They work for themselves, they fend for themselves. The rich have done individual levels acts of charity, and we are very charitable people, but at an institutional and a governmental and a redistributive macro level, I don't think anything has ever been done by the people, by the rich for the people. Yet it is the poor that are maintaining this economy. And now we're not even giving them electricity, so let's hope for the best. But by their remittances, the fact that remittances have gone up from 6 billion to 10, 11 billion in the last 3-4 years, and some of it, of course, being channeled through the banking system, that is what's keeping your rupee steady. So, so what I'm trying to say is, it's the people who are keeping this country going, and we haven't done very much about for them, unfortunately, in the last 60 years.
Thank you very much. That's quite a sobering talk and a lot of food for thought. But the issue is, how do we reverse this transfer? How do you take it away from the political elites and give it to the people? Can you do it through organizations like this? As you said, it has to be institutionalized at a state level. How does one go about doing this? What are the strategies that need to be developed? So I think if we can focus, we have about 20 minutes, I believe, left. So if we can spend, say, 10 or 10 minutes or so and maybe talk about strategies, and then we could open it up to questions. Any thoughts, strategies?
May I say something? I think it's, if we go into the total background, the change of skill, agriculturists, the artisans, the others, it's not a quick fix. And if we go through the history of the US, they went through a civil war to establish their skills and rights and their domains. What we like to say is that, particularly when we speak of microfinance, we say it's not in competition with anybody. It is creating opportunities. Now, when I say opportunities, it is, without what I said, the skill, shikwa, jawab shikwa, very clearly, today, out of 180 million population, technically, on record, 14 million people have accounts. And if we say the one who do not have financial inclusion, they are about 27 million people. If by one action of a microfinance today we commit that the combination of technology and reach out to the people can go up to 70% in the next 3 to 4 years, we mean that we will have 22, 24 million people in the financial inclusion. They can do transactions, they can do it. Rest, it's their choice. They go to the Islamic side, they go to the other side, because that's a fact of history, me and you can't change it. So that's where we bring in that we bring opportunities. Let's say Tamir Microfinance Bank were all professional bankers at the peak of their careers. They switched over on one table and created this with one passion. The technology must reach out, let people use it, how they use it, and we don't get grants. It's all commercial. So when we say we are not in competition, it is the battle of opportunities. If we create opportunities, everybody will come up, and education is the base and financial is the skill. Thank you.
I think that what you said is very interesting, the whole issue of a civil war. I think Pakistan is in a civil war at the moment, whether we choose to admit it or not. It's a very serious situation. And if we look at our situation today, and you want to institutionalize what the microfinance banks are doing, for example, how does one go about doing that? I mean, we should be really talking in practical terms. How do we institutionalize all these things? How do we take it to the next level? We all know what the strategies are. Everyone's written about them a million times. There's zillions of papers. If you Google poverty alleviation on the internet, you'll get millions of hits.